I thought surviving on 4 hours of sleep and raising 5 kids alone was my breaking point. Then I inherited a decaying house in Michigan from a stranger. I walked in hoping for a quick sale, but the rusted lock guarded more than just dust. On a wall of dead faces, I found a photograph of my ex-husband taken 20 years ago. The problem was, we only met 7 years ago. Suddenly, my messy divorce felt like a calculated crime. My name is Haley Brooks, and if exhaustion were a currency, I would be the richest woman in Ohio. At 32 years old, I function as an ER nurse at a private hospital in Maple Ridge, pulling shifts that would kill a draft horse. I am also the single mother of 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls who move like a swarm of locusts. My life is a delicate ecosystem of caffeine, dry shampoo, and the constant fear that one unpaid bill will topple the whole house of cards. The morning began with the usual sensory assault. Mom Tyler put, "He put orange juice in my cereal." My youngest daughter screamed from the kitchen. "I was making a potion," Tyler yelled back. "Drink the potion or starve." I muttered under my breath, grabbing my keys. I checked my bank account while waiting for the toaster to pop. The balance was negative $40. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to make me panic but now just made me tired. I had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying the brand of diapers that did not give the baby a rash. Outside, my minivan sat in the driveway like a beached whale. It was a rusty beige disaster with 180,000 miles on the odometer. The sliding door only opened if you kicked it in the sweet spot, and the interior smelled permanently of old French fries and despair. I loaded the kids in, doing a mental head count while scrolling past a notification on my phone. It was a post from Nolan, my ex-husband, the father of these 5 children. He was posing on a rock in Sedona, arms wide open to the sky, wearing a linen shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The caption read, "Responsibility is a choice you make every day to honor your highest self." "Honor this," I whispered, swiping the screen away violently. Nolan Hayes, the man who told the family court judge that I was emotionally volatile and unfit for the pressure of decision-making, was currently living his best life as a self-help guru. Meanwhile, his child support payment was 6 weeks late. He had gaslit me for a decade, twisting my reality until I apologized for him cheating on me. He made me small. He made me doubt my own eyes. He told the world he was a victim of a bitter woman, and the world believed him because he had a nice smile and a podcast. Then the email came. It arrived at 3 a.m. after a double shift. A lawyer from Michigan. I had inherited a property in a town called Graybridge from Eleanor Hart, a grandmother I had not seen since I was in diapers. I almost deleted it, but the legal attachments looked real. They listed me and all 5 kids as beneficiaries. This can't be right, I said to the empty living room, squinting at the screen. But desperation makes you a believer. I did not care if the house was a shack. If I could sell it for even $50,000, I could pay off the credit cards. I could breathe. I could stop counting pennies at the gas pump. I packed the kids into the van on Saturday morning. The drive was long. As the flat cornfields of Ohio gave way to the dense woods of Michigan, my mind drifted back to the end of the marriage. I remembered Nolan's voice, smooth and condescending, echoing in the silence of the car. "Haley, you are spiraling again. You see malice where there is none. You really need professional help." He had been so convincing. I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Not today. I was done being the crazy one. Today was about survival. We turned onto a narrow, paved road that wound up a steep hill. The trees were thick here, blocking out the afternoon sun. As we crested the top, the house came into view. It was not a shack. It was a massive, looming Victorian structure with gray shingles and a wraparound porch that looked like it belonged in a history book. I put the van in park. The engine sputtered and died. Are we staying here?" My oldest son asked, his voice low. I looked up at the house. It looked abandoned, lonely, and slightly terrifying, but to me, it looked like a check that might actually clear. "We might be, kiddo," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Let's go see if our luck has finally turned around." The van engine ticked as it cooled, the only familiar sound in a silence that felt heavy, almost pressurized. The house sat on the hill like a judge on a bench, staring down at us. It was a faded Victorian beauty, stripped of its color by decades of Michigan winters. The shingles were the color of wet slate, and a massive oak tree draped its branches over the left side of the porch, obscuring the upper windows in permanent shadow. It looked abandoned, yes, but not dead. It looked like it was holding its breath. The wooden steps complained loudly as we walked up, groaning under the weight of 5 kids and one exhausted mother. "Mom is there." "Are there ghosts in there?" Leo asked, gripping the back of my shirt. "The only thing scary in there is probably the plumbing," I said, forcing a laugh I did not feel. "And maybe the dust bunnies." I looked up at the second-floor window. The glass was dark, but for a split second, I saw the heavy velvet drape shift. It twitched inward. I frowned. The wind was blowing hard against my back, pushing toward the house. If the window was drafty, the curtain should have blown in, not moved sideways against the current. A cold prickle of unease danced down my spine. I reached for the front door handle. The metal was freezing against my palm. I hesitated. I smelled something. It was faint, drifting through the hairline crack of the doorframe. Coffee, freshly brewed, cheap coffee. That's impossible," I whispered to myself. Grandmother Eleanor had been dead for nearly 2 years. The estate lawyer swore nobody had been inside since the funeral. I turned the key. The lock tumbled with a smooth, well-oiled click that betrayed the rust on the outside. I pushed the door open. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light I let in, but the air inside did not smell like a tomb. It smelled like old paper, stale cigarette smoke, and the chemical bite of cleaning fluid that had not quite faded away. It smelled like someone had been here last week. The foyer was grand but dim. To my right, a long wall was covered in framed photographs, black and white portraits of stern ancestors, a few sepia-toned landscapes, and pictures of Eleanor at various ages. My eyes traveled down to the bottom row, where a single color photograph sat in a cheap plastic frame. I stepped closer, and the air left my lungs. It was a profile shot of a man speaking at a podium. He was wearing a navy suit, his hair gelled back in a style that was popular a decade ago. But I knew that face. I knew the exact curve of that jawline. I knew the way the corner of his eye crinkled when he smiled his fake, politician smile. "Nolan," I breathed, my hand flying to my mouth. But it could not be Nolan. The date handwritten in the corner was 2009. In 2009, Nolan and I were barely 20 years old, partying in dorm rooms. The man in the photo was in his late 30s. I looked at the label underneath. Nathan Hale, Graybridge Town Council. My stomach turned over. It was like looking at a ghost or a clone. The resemblance was not just passing, it was biological. It was terrifying. How could my ex-husband, a man from a suburb in Ohio, have a doppelganger in this forgotten town in Michigan? "Can we go explore?" the twins shouted, breaking my trance. "Stay on this floor," I snapped, my voice too loud, too sharp. "Do not go upstairs. Do not. Just don't touch anything." They scattered toward the kitchen. I turned away from the photo, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I walked down the hallway toward the living room. The floorboards were bare, but the baseboards were strange. I saw a thick white cable stapled neatly along the wood modern Ethernet cable. I looked at a bookshelf filled with dusty encyclopedias, nestled between volume 4 and 5. A small black circle glinted. A camera lens. I pulled a modem out from behind a chair. The lights were off, but the plastic was warm. Someone had unplugged this recently. Maybe minutes ago. I stood in the center of the dim living room. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. From the kitchen, I could hear the high-pitched giggles of my children opening cupboards. But then I froze. Above me, the floorboards creaked. It was a rhythmic, deliberate sound. Creak, pause, creak. It was not the wind. It was not the house settling. It was the sound of weight shifting. Someone was walking across the bedroom directly above my head. The door at the end of the first-floor hallway was an anomaly. While every other door in the house was original Victorian wood, warped by humidity and age, this one was reinforced steel painted to look like wood, fitted with a deadbolt that cost at least $200. It took me 20 minutes of rummaging through the kitchen junk drawers before I found a heavy brass key ring inside a ceramic jar labeled flour. The tag on the key read simply, "Workroom." "Workroom," I muttered, testing the key in the lock. "Grandma, you were a retired librarian. What work were you doing?" The lock tumbled. I pushed the door open, expecting a sewing room or perhaps a storage space for holiday decorations. I was wrong. It was a war room. That was the only way to describe it. The windows were blacked out with heavy construction paper. The walls were absolutely covered in maps of Graybridge, timelines drawn on whiteboard paint, and corkboards drowning in receipts and photographs connected by red string. In the center of the room sat a heavy metal desk dominated by 3 bulky computer monitors, a high-end scanner, and a row of external hard drives labeled by year. I walked to the nearest shelf. A thick binder was labeled Graybridge Justice Project, E. Hart. I opened it. The first page was a copy of my grandmother's resume. She hadn't just been a librarian. Before that, she had spent 30 years as a court clerk. She knew how paperwork moved. More importantly, she knew how it disappeared. I flipped through the pages. This wasn't a hobby. It was a forensic accounting of local corruption. There were logs of building permits issued to companies that did not exist, zoning changes approved at midnight hearings, and police reports that had been redacted into meaninglessness. Then I saw a box on the floor. It was red, unlike the others. The label made my breath hitch. Family, Haley B. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a photocopy of my entire divorce file from Ohio. But these weren't just the court documents I had seen. These were the drafts. "Oh my God," I whispered. There were emails printed out. Emails between my ex-husband's attorney and Dr. Eris, the court-appointed family therapist I had trusted, the therapist who had told the judge I was paranoid and projecting. I picked up a printout dated October 14th, 2 years ago. Subject strategy adjustment. Body Nolan is worried she's sounding too coherent. We need to emphasize the fatigue. If you can schedule her sessions after her night shifts, she'll appear more unstable. The judge likes a calm father figure. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grab the desk. They had scheduled me when I was weak on purpose. It wasn't bad luck. It was a script. I looked at the desk. A digital voice recorder was plugged into the computer. I clicked the mouse, waking the sleeping screen. A folder named Judge Vance, Private, was open. I clicked the first file. The audio was grainy, recorded perhaps in a restaurant or a hallway. But the voice was unmistakable. It was the judge who had cut my visitation rights. "Look, nobody wants a weeping nurse in the photos. We need the dad. He's got the look. He sells the story of rehabilitation. Just keep the mother on the defensive." I slumped into the office chair. My grandmother had known. She had been watching my life fall apart from 300 miles away, documenting the demolition. I reached for another file. This one labeled Nathan Hale. It was thick. Inside were photos of the man who looked like Nolan Nathan Hale, the town councilman. There were bank statements showing transfers of $5,000, $10,000, moving from a community betterment fund into cash withdrawals. At the bottom of the stack, I found a handwritten note on yellow legal pad paper. The handwriting was sharp and spidery. Haley, if you are reading this, you have survived the thing I feared most. The system used your kindness against you. I could not intervene then without exposing everything too soon. This house is not just a burden. It is a weapon. Use it carefully. I wasn't just inheriting a house. I was inheriting a loaded gun. I looked at the center monitor. A video file was paused on the screen. The timestamp was 4 years ago. I pressed play. The footage was grainy. Night vision, shot from what looked like a camera hidden in a tree. It showed the parking lot of a diner I didn't recognize. A car pulled up. A man got out. I covered my mouth to stifle a gasp. Nolan. It was my ex-husband. He looked younger, less polished than his current guru persona. He was pacing nervously. A moment later, another car arrived. The man who stepped out was Nathan Hale. Seeing them in the same frame was disorienting, like seeing a man meet his own reflection. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. Nolan handed Nathan a thick manila envelope. Nathan opened it, thumbed through a stack of cash, and nodded. Then Nathan handed Nolan something small, a set of keys. A flash drive I couldn't tell. Nolan looked around, his eyes darting to the shadows, right into the lens of the camera he didn't know was there. He looked terrified. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears drying on my face. My divorce hadn't been a failure of love. It had been a business transaction. And whatever Nolan had bought or sold that night in the parking lot, it had cost me my life. You son of a bitch, I said to the screen, my voice steady for the first time in years. You are going to pay for every single tear, my children cried. The glow of the computer monitor washed over my face, turning my skin the color of a bruise. I sat there in the silence of my dead grandmother's war room, and for a moment, I was not in Michigan. I was back in a coffee shop in Ohio, 10 years ago, watching Nolan lean across a tiny table. He had looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. I just want to help people live better lives. Haley, he had said, his voice dropping to that intimate, husky register he perfected. I grew up with nothing. Absolutely nothing. So now, I want to be the rock for everyone else. At 22, I thought it was vulnerability. Now, sitting in this dust-free room surrounded by evidence of his corruption, I realized it was not a confession. It was a rehearsal. He had been testing his brand on me. I was the first focus group for the product that was Nolan Hayes. I closed my eyes, and his voice from the later years invaded my head. You are reacting to things that aren't there. Hales, he used to say while I cried in the bathroom. You're creating drama because you're bored. You should thank me for putting up with your paranoia. He had said it so many times that I had carved it into my own bones. I believed him. I believed I was the broken gear in the machine of our family. My hand drifted to a stack of papers in the family, Haley B. box. It was the psychological evaluation from our custody hearing. I remembered that day. I remembered sitting in Dr. Aris's beige office, twisting a tissue until it shredded, trying to explain that my husband made me feel invisible. The report I held now was the draft Dr. Aris had written before the final court submission. There were red ink notes in the margins notes that were not in the version the judge saw. Patient is exhausted but cogent. Reaction to husband's behavior is consistent with emotional neglect. But there was a sticky note attached to the front, written in a different hand. Too soft. Needs to sound clinical. Make her sound impulsive. Impulse control issues equal supervised visitation. I picked up the transcript of a phone call recorded 3 days after that note was written. It was between Nolan's shark of a lawyer and Dr. Aris. We need to focus on the optics. Doctor, the court prioritizes the stable father figure. If the mother looks like a mess, well, that's just better for the children. Isn't it Nolan has the income? He has the public image. We just need you to confirm that Haley is fragile. I felt a phantom weight in my arms. I remembered those nights after the divorce started. I was nursing the baby, sitting in the dark, popping the anti-anxiety pills my doctor had prescribed because everyone convinced me I was losing my mind. I had looked down at my son's sleeping face and cried, terrified that my instability would ruin him. I wasn't unstable. I was being framed. I looked around the room. The maps, the timelines, the red string connecting names and dates. For years, while I was drowning in guilt, thinking I was a failure of a wife and a mother, Eleanor Hart had been here. She had been watching. She had believed me. A sob caught in my throat, but it didn't come out as a cry. It came out as a laugh, a dry, sharp, jagged sound. You knew. I whispered to the empty chair where my grandmother used to sit. You knew I wasn't crazy. It was the most validating and devastating feeling of my life. I wasn't a screw-up who lost her husband because she couldn't keep it together. I was a target. I was a casualty in a business plan. Nolan didn't leave me because I was difficult. He discarded me because I was no longer a useful prop for his narrative. I stood up. My legs felt stiff, but the exhaustion that had plagued me for 5 years was gone. In its place was something cold and hard, like the steel of the reinforced door behind me. I picked up the photocopy of the referral for anger management that the judge had ordered me to sign 3 years ago. I had kept a copy in my own files out of shame, a reminder of my failure. Grandma Eleanor had kept a copy too, filed under evidence of coercion. I looked at Nolan's signature on the bottom line, looping and confident. Then I looked at the hidden camera on the shelf. The game had changed. They thought they had buried a hysterical ex-wife in a mountain of debt and self-doubt. They didn't know I had just found the shovel. I took the paper in both hands. The sound of it ripping was loud in the quiet room. 1 tear, then 2, then 4, until the court order was nothing but confetti in my hands. I walked to the metal trash can by the desk and let the pieces fall. This time, I said, my voice echoing slightly off the map-covered walls, I am not the patient. I am the one writing the report. I realized very quickly that while I could suture a wound in a moving ambulance, I did not know the first thing about forensic accounting or federal wiretapping laws. I was sitting on a mountain of dynamite, and I was just as likely to blow myself up as I was to scratch Nolan. I needed a team. My first stop was across the street. I had noticed a man sitting on his porch, watching my house with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. He was a Hispanic man in his late 60s, with posture so rigid he looked like he had a steel rod for a spine. His mailbox said, Alvarez. I know you were watching the house, I said, standing at the foot of his driveway. I promised Eleanor I would, he replied, not even blinking. His name was Miguel Alvarez. It turned out he wasn't just a nosy neighbor. He was a retired federal postal inspector. As he put it, everyone fears the FBI, but the Postal Inspection Service, we are the ones who actually get the conviction. When I told him about the room, he didn't look surprised. He just sighed, grabbed a heavy cardigan, and followed me across the street. Your grandmother was the most stubborn woman in Graybridge, Miguel muttered as we walked. I told her this data was radioactive, while Miguel started sorting through the physical files with terrifying efficiency. I called Tasha. Tasha Miller has been my best friend since nursing school. She is the kind of person who will help you bury a body and then lecture you about proper lifting mechanics while digging the hole. Haley, honey, you sound manic, Tasha said over FaceTime, squinting at me while eating a bagel. You need sleep, not a conspiracy theory. Just watch the video I sent you, I said. Please. There was a 10-second silence on the line as she opened the file. Then, I heard a sharp intake of breath. Is that your ex-husband shaking hands with the guy who keeps running ads for Family Values? Tasha asked, her voice dropping an octave. I'm swapping shifts. I'll be there in 4 hours. We needed one more set of hands. Specifically, hands that knew how to operate a server rack from the 90s without frying it, Miguel pointed toward the woods behind the property. Kid named Jaden lives in the trailer back there. Miguel said, fixes computers, streams video games, never sleeps. Jaden Cole was about 20, wearing a hoodie that hadn't seen a washing machine in a week, but he looked at my grandmother's server setup with pure reverence. This is retro gold, Jaden said, tapping a keyboard. She's got air-gapped backups. This is beautiful. By Saturday evening, my kitchen table looked like the headquarters of a low-budget spy movie. Miguel was building a case file for federal jurisdiction regarding mail fraud and racketeering. Tasha was cross-referencing dates from the files with the timeline of my children's lives to ensure we had a safety plan. Jaden was migrating the data to encrypted drives. Hey, guys. Jaden's voice cracked. He spun his monitor around. We have a problem. The internal logs show a remote login attempt on the cloud backup. Yesterday. The room went dead silent. Did they get in? I asked, my stomach dropping. No, Jaden said, typing furiously. The firewall stopped them. But it means someone knows this server exists. And they are knocking on the door. I looked up at the ceiling. I could hear the thudding of feet. My 5 children were playing a game of tag upstairs. They thought we were on a weird vacation in a dusty hotel. They had no idea their mother was downstairs plotting a takedown with a postal cop and a gamer. Tasha put her hand on my arm. Her grip was tight. Haley, look at me, she said. You have enough here to get full custody and maybe a settlement. Or, you have enough to bury the whole town council. What do you want? Do you want justice for the divorce? Or do you want to burn it all down? It was the question I had been avoiding. Was this about my alimony? Or was this about the system that let men like Nolan win? Before I could answer, Miguel cleared his throat. He pulled a slim red box from the bottom of a stack. It was labeled, "If anything happens to me, send this." He opened it. Inside wasn't money. It was a list of names, a contact at the Chicago Tribune, a private email address for a Michigan state prosecutor, and a handwritten note on top, scrawled in my grandmother's distinct cursive. Miguel slid the note toward me. It read, "For Haley to decide." I stared at the paper. Eleanor hadn't pulled the trigger because she wanted me to have the choice. She had handed me the match, but she left it up to me to decide if I was just lighting a candle or if I was setting the whole world on fire. The office of Alicia Porter was a cramped room in the back of a community center in Maple Ridge, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and despair. Alicia was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a messy bun that suggested she had not stopped working since sunrise. I placed a thin manila folder on her desk. I had been careful. I did not bring the corruption files or the blackmail tapes. I only brought the evidence that proved my divorce was rigged. Alicia flipped through the pages, her skepticism evident in the tight line of her mouth. Haley, these are serious accusations, she said, tapping a photocopy of the email between my therapist and Nolan's lawyer. But the chain of custody here is a nightmare. Where did you get these? My grandmother was a court clerk for 30 years, I said, keeping my voice steady. She knew how to file things, and she knew how to document when people were breaking the rules. Alicia stopped. She read the handwritten notes again. Slowly, her expression shifted from annoyance to professional fury. She saw what I saw, not just a bad breakup, but a coordinated effort to dismantle a woman's credibility. This isn't just unethical, Alicia murmured, pulling a yellow legal pad toward her. This is collusion. If we file for a motion to reconsider based on fraud on the court, we aren't just asking for money. We are asking them to admit the judgment was poison from the start. We filed the paperwork on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my phone rang. The screen displayed Nolan. He had not called me in 4 months, usually preferring to send passive-aggressive texts about drop-off times. Haley. His voice came through the speaker, smooth and reasonable, the voice of the man everyone else loved. I got a call from my attorney. I really thought we were past this phase. I stood in the kitchen of the Graybridge house, gripping the counter. What phase is that? Nolan. The phase where you try to blow up our lives because you're unhappy. He sighed, a sound of practiced patience. We have peace right now. The kids are settling in. Why would you want to drag them through the mud again? Isn't it time to think about them instead of your own impulses? He was doing it again. He was making me feel like the aggressor for simply asking to be treated fairly, but this time, I looked at the security monitor mounted under the cabinet. I saw the truth. I am thinking about them, I said, and I hung up. But Nolan's call was not the only reaction. The house in Graybridge, which had felt like a fortress, started to feel porous. That night, Tasha and I were doing a perimeter check. The rusted iron gate at the bottom of the driveway, which we always kept padlocked, was standing wide open. On the bottom step of the porch, perfectly illuminated by the motion sensor light, was a muddy boot print. It was too big to belong to me or Tasha. And Miguel wore orthopedic sneakers with a different tread. Someone was here, Tasha whispered, her hand instinctively going to the pepper spray on her keychain. Check the cameras, I said. We pulled up the footage. At 2 a.m, a figure in a dark hoodie and a baseball cap had walked up the drive. He didn't try to break in. He just stood there, staring up at the house for 3 minutes, then turned and vanished into the dark. 2 days later, the threat moved closer. I went down to the cellar to grab a bottle of wine. The heavy wooden door was unlocked. I froze. I knew I had locked it. I pushed it open. The room looked undisturbed at first glance. But then I saw it. On the metal shelving unit, a banker's box labeled Hail. Donations had been pulled out and shoved back in crookedly. The dust around it was smeared. My heart hammered against my ribs. They hadn't taken anything. They were checking to see if the files were still there. I ran across the street to get Miguel. He came back with a flashlight and a grim expression. He walked the property line, disappearing into the woods for 20 minutes. When he came back, he was holding a shattered piece of plastic. They smashed the trail camera on the south oak, Miguel said, tossing the debris onto the kitchen table. It wasn't an accident. They knew exactly where the blind spot was. Whoever is doing this, they know this property. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I was preparing to be painted as a liar in court again. I expected legal attacks. I did not expect footsteps in my basement. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Alicia. I picked it up, expecting bad news, expecting to hear that the court had thrown out our motion as baseless. Haley Alicia's voice was breathless. You need to sit down. What happened? I asked, bracing myself. Did they dismiss it? No, Alicia said. The court accepted the motion to reconsider. But that's not the big news. Judge Vance, the judge who presided over your divorce. He just filed a request to recuse himself from the review. Why, I asked? He cited potential conflict of interest, Alicia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Haley, judges don't step down unless they are scared of what might come out. We didn't just knock on the door. We scared the house. The house had a heartbeat. That was the only way I could describe it. After the revelations of the past week, I decided to give the investigation a rest for 48 hours. I wanted to be a mother again, not a detective. We roasted marshmallows in the stone fire pit out back, and the kids chased fireflies near the tree line. But even as I laughed at my youngest son's marshmallow mustache, my eyes kept drifting to the dark, sloping road. I was waiting for headlights. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. On Sunday afternoon, while the boys were napping, I took my 12-year-old daughter, Maya, up to the attic. The air up there was hot and smelled of cedar and thyme. We were moving boxes of old quilts when Maya dragged a heavy leather trunk from under the eaves. Mom, this one is locked, Maya said, tugging on the brass combination lock. What do you think the code is? Probably 000, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. Tried that. She said, It didn't work. Maybe it's your birthday. She rolled the tumblers. June 4th, 0604. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap. Inside, there were no gold bars or jewels. There were only stacks of letters, tied together with blue ribbon. I picked up the top bundle and felt a physical ache in my chest. The handwriting was my mother's. She had passed away 5 years ago, right before my marriage truly disintegrated. I unfolded a letter dated 7 years ago. Dear Eleanor, I don't know how to reach her anymore. Nolan is twisting her mind. Today, she told me that I was the one being negative, that I was imagining the way he speaks to her. He has her convinced that her intuition is a sickness. I am terrified that by the time she wakes up, she won't have enough of herself left to leave. I sat down hard on the dusty floorboards. My mother had seen it. She had tried to tell me, and I had pushed her away because Nolan told me she was jealous of our happiness. I picked up the very last letter in the stack, written weeks before she died. The house on the hill has to be the safety net, Eleanor. If everything falls apart, if I am not here to catch her, that house has to be the place where he cannot reach them. Use it to protect the children from anyone, even their father, Mom Maya asked, touching my shoulder. Are you okay? I'm fine, baby. I managed to say, though my voice was thick, just allergies. I heard the crunch of gravel on the driveway. I stood up and moved to the attic window. A battered red sedan had pulled up next to my minivan. I recognized the car, and I recognized the woman stepping out of it, looking up at the house with a mix of awe and annoyance. It was Ruby, my half-sister. I went down to the porch to meet her. Ruby was 26, working double shifts as a waitress 2 counties over. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. When I left Nolan, Ruby had told me I was making a mistake. She had said Nolan was a good man and that I was ruining a family over nothing. You got a letter too. Huh, Ruby asked, not making eye contact. She was holding a thick legal envelope. I inherited the house? I said, crossing my arms. What are you doing here? Ruby, I am the backup, she said, tossing the envelope onto the porch swing. The will says if you refuse the inheritance, or if you try to sell the property within the first year without reviewing the archive. The title transfers to me temporarily. I'm the failsafe. I stared at her. Grandma Eleanor had thought of everything. She knew I would be desperate for money. She knew I would try to sell. So she brought in the one person who would force me to stop my estranged sister. Ruby reached into her purse and pulled out a smaller, personal envelope. Grandma left this for me to give to you, Ruby said, her voice softer now. She wrote that she knew you wouldn't feel like you deserved this house. She said you would try to cash it out to fix your mistakes. She told me not to let you sell it until you understood why it was built. Ruby looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Her eyes were tired. She had the same dark circles I did. I thought she was crazy, Ruby said, kicking at a loose floorboard. But then I read the file she left for me, the one about Nolan. Night fell, turning the woods around us into a wall of black. The kids were asleep upstairs. Ruby and I sat on the porch steps, the silence between us heavy but no longer hostile. He lied to everyone, Ruby said quietly. He borrowed money from me, 2 years ago. Said you were spending it all on reckless things. I believed him. I know. I said, he's good at that. I looked at my sister. She had been a pawn just like me. Eleanor had brought us here not just to fight a legal battle, but to fix this crack in the foundation. If I use this house to drag Nolan and his entire club of corrupt friends down, I asked, looking straight into the dark woods, are you going to be with me? Or are you going to tell me I'm being dramatic? Ruby was silent for a long time. She watched a moth throw itself against the porch light. I am tired of defending the wrong person, she said, her voice shaking just a little. Burn him. Burn them all. The dining room table was no longer a place for family meals. It was a command center. We sat in a circle, Ruby, Tasha, Miguel, Jaden, and Alicia's face on a laptop screen surrounded by stacks of paper that mapped out the destruction of two men's lives. We were not just planning a legal defense. We were planning a siege. We attack on 3 fronts, I said, my voice sounding steadier than it had in years. Legal, media, and security. If we pull one thread, they might fix it. If we pull them all at once, the whole sweater unravels. Alicia spoke first from the screen. I have drafted the motion for the family court, she said, holding up a document. We are not just arguing for custody. We are arguing that the previous judgment was obtained through fraud and professional malpractice. I am attaching the emails between Dr. Eris and Nolan's lawyer, but I am sending a separate package to the State Ethics Board regarding Judge Vance. Once that hits, he won't be able to touch your case without looking like a criminal. Miguel tapped a folder on the table. The media is the second front, he said. Eleanor had a contact at the Chicago Tribune, an investigative journalist who specializes in municipal corruption. We send him the financial records of the town council. We keep your name out of it for now. We frame it as a misuse of public funds by Nathan Hale. And safety, Jaden added, spinning his laptop around. I set up a dead man's switch. If the power to this house is cut, or if the server goes offline without my authorization code, everything, and I mean terabytes of video and audio, gets automatically emailed to Alicia, the journalist, and the FBI Cybercrimes Division. Basically, if they try to silence us, they scream our story to the world. I looked at Tasha. She had been teaching the kids a game all morning. If I say the words Red Rover, I told the group, Tasha takes the kids to the cellar. It has a heavy bolt on the inside. No matter what they hear upstairs, they don't open it unless I give the all clear. It felt cold. It felt calculated. But then I looked at the last piece of evidence we had found, and the coldness turned into necessary armor. It was a video file Jaden had recovered from a corrupted sector of the drive. It showed my living room, right where we were sitting, dated 3 years ago. Nolan was standing there. My husband, who told me he was at a conference in Cleveland, was standing in my grandmother's house, holding a Scotch glass, talking to Nathan Hale. The family man angle is gold. Nathan, Nolan said on the video, his voice clear. I play the devoted dad dealing with a crazy wife, and you use that to push your policy on family stability. It's a perfect sympathy vote. I get the clients who want a savior, and you get the Senate seat, but I need the cash up front to pay for the lawyer. He had sold us. He had traded his children's emotional stability for campaign donations and coaching clients. I'm going to meet him, I said, standing up. Haley, that's dangerous, Ruby said, gripping my arm. No, I said. It's necessary. He needs to know that the game has changed. Jaden, get the wire ready. I met Nolan at a coffee shop halfway between Maple Ridge and Graybridge. It was neutral ground, crowded and loud. Jaden sat 3 tables away, wearing headphones, monitoring the tiny camera and microphone pinned to my collar. Nolan walked in wearing his signature casual chic sweater. He looked concerned. He looked perfect. Haley, he said, sitting down and reaching for my hand. I pulled it away. You look tired. Are you sleeping? I'm worried that this new house is just another manic phase. Maybe we should talk about the kids staying with me full-time until you stabilize. He was doing it again, the soft voice, the furrowed brow, the implication that I was a ticking time bomb. I'm not manic. Nolan, I said, placing my phone on the table face down. I'm informed. See, this is what I mean. He sighed, shaking his head. You get these ideas that you're fighting some big battle. Nobody is against you. Hales, it's all in your head. You're going to ruin everything for the kids if you keep digging up. Whatever you think you're finding. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just flipped my phone over and pressed play. The video was silent at first, just the image of him standing in the Graybridge living room. Then, the audio kicked in. It's a perfect sympathy vote. I get the clients who want a savior. Nolan stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a wax figure. His eyes darted from the screen to me, then to the people around us. The mask of the concerned father crumbled, replaced by the raw panic of a con artist caught in the spotlight. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. That's illegal. You can't." I interrupted, "and I have more. I have the emails. I have the bank transfers. I have everything." I leaned in close. "If you ever try to paint me as unfit again, if you ever miss a support payment, or if you ever use our children as props for your business, this video goes to every news outlet in the state, and the FBI gets the rest." Nolan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked small. For the first time in 10 years, he looked like the pathetic man he actually was. I stood up, leaving him sitting there with his half-drunk latte and his ruined reputation hanging by a thread. "Don't follow me," I said. I drove back to the house on the hill. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the driveway. I walked into the kitchen where the team was waiting. I nodded to Miguel. "Do it," I said. Miguel hit the enter key on his laptop. A soft whoosh sound signaled that the first batch of emails had been sent to the Chicago Tribune. I sat down and picked up a marker. On the whiteboard, next to the words Phase 1, I drew a check mark. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing in panic. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the storm. I was the one directing the wind. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning like a bomb detonated in the center of the town square. It was a 5,000-word expose in the Chicago Tribune titled "The Shadow Council of Graybridge." It did not mention my name, but it detailed a pattern of judicial misconduct involving a local family court judge, a corrupt therapist, and a prominent town councilman named Nathan Hale. By noon, Nathan Hale had been asked to step aside from his duties pending an investigation. By 2 o'clock, the state medical board announced a formal inquiry into Dr. Aris for ethical violations regarding patient confidentiality. The shockwaves hit Nolan by dinner time. I watched it happen in real time on my phone. His corporate sponsors, terrified of the proximity to a scandal involving bribery and fraud, began quietly scrubbing his face from their websites. His Instagram comment section, usually a shrine of praise for his mindful masculinity, turned into a battlefield. "Is it true you paid a judge fake? This guy talks about integrity while fixing his own divorce." It was satisfying. It was intoxicating, but it was not enough. I retreated to the war room. There was one box left on the shelf that I had been avoiding. It was a small, black archival box with a label in Eleanor's sharp handwriting, "Only open when you are ready to know everything, even the things you do not want to know." My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no paper. There was just a single silver USB drive and a handwritten date from 4 years ago. I plugged it into the computer. There was one audio file. I put my headphones on and pressed play. The background noise was loud clinking glasses, laughter, bass-heavy music. It sounded like a party. Then, Nolan's voice cut through the noise, slightly slurred, arrogant, and unguarded. He was talking to a man I didn't recognize. "5 is a lot. Man," the stranger said. "I don't know how you handle the noise." "I don't." Nolan laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "That's her problem. Honestly, I never wanted a litter like that. 2 would have been fine, but 5. 5 makes a statement. It plays well in the seminars. Judges love a provider. Clients trust a patriarch with a big brood. It's branding. The chaos is worth the credibility." I ripped the headphones off my head and threw them onto the desk. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My children, my beautiful, chaotic, exhausting, wonderful children. They were not people to him. They were props. They were accessories he wore to look successful, like a tie or a watch. He had pushed for a big family not out of love, but because patriarchs sold more seminar tickets. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded my veins. I wanted to upload this file right now. I wanted every person who ever bought his book, every judge who admired his commitment to fatherhood, to hear him call his own children branding. I wanted to burn him to ash. "If you release that," Miguel said from the doorway, startling me, "you kill him. Professionally, socially. He is dead. He deserves it." I spat, my hand hovering over the mouse. "Did you hear what he said I heard?" Miguel said, his voice low. "But once that is on the internet, Haley, it stays there. Forever. And one day, Leo is going to Google his father. Maya is going to search for her name. Do you want them to hear their father call them a marketing strategy?" I looked at the screen. I looked at the send button on the email drafted to the journalist. Tasha walked in, standing beside Miguel. She looked at my face and knew exactly what was happening. "Justice isn't always pretty, Hales," Tasha said softly, "but it is honest. If you drop the bomb, you destroy the village. Are you ready to explain the wreckage to the kids I stared at the USB drive? It was the ultimate weapon. It was the truth that would end him completely. If I sent this, Nolan would never work again. He would be a pariah." But then I thought of Maya's smile. I thought of the way Tyler looked at his dad when he did visit with Hope, however misplaced. If I released this, I wouldn't just be hurting Nolan. I would be shattering their hearts. I would be taking their innocence and sacrificing it on the altar of my revenge. I closed my eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The anger didn't leave, but it cooled into something solid, something controllable. "No," I whispered. "Not today." I reached down and pulled the USB drive out of the port. I held it in my palm. It felt heavy. "I am not going to release it," I said, turning to face Miguel and Tasha. "I am going to keep it. It is my insurance policy. If he ever tries to hurt us again, if he ever tries to take them, or if he ever lies about me to another soul, then I pull the trigger. But until then, he gets to live in fear of what I know." I walked over to the safe in the corner of the room, placed the silver drive inside, and spun the dial. The lock clicked shut. It wasn't the end of the war, but I had just secured the nuclear option, and knowing I had the power to destroy him was infinitely more satisfying than actually doing it. The rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 drum beats, drowning out the sound of the wind howling through the trees. It was 3 in the morning when Jaden's security system flashed red. I was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with Miguel. We looked at the monitor. A figure was struggling with the back door, soaked to the bone, trying to jam a key into a lock that had been changed weeks ago. It was Nolan, but it was not the Nolan the world knew. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his movements jerky and frantic. He looked like a man who had been running for a very long time. "He is desperate," Miguel said, his hand resting near his phone. "Desperate men make mistakes." I turned to Ruby. "Take them down," I said quietly. Ruby nodded, her face pale but determined. She ushered all 5 sleepy children toward the heavy cellar door, where blankets and flashlights were already waiting. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Sarah, the state investigator Alicia had put on standby. "He is here." Then I walked to the front door. I was not going to let him break the back window. I wanted him in the living room. I wanted him on the main camera. I unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. Nolan stood there, shivering, his expensive jacket ruined by the mud. He looked up, startled, his eyes wild. "You!" He seethed, pushing past me into the warmth of the hallway. "You did this. You poisoned them against me." I closed the door and followed him into the living room. The warm yellow light made him look even more pathetic. He spun around, his chest heaving. Do you have any idea what you've done? Nolan shouted, his voice cracking. My sponsors are pulling out. The bank is freezing my accounts. You hired people to attack me online. You used this house to build a trap. I didn't build a trap. Nolan, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I just turned on the lights. I want the files, he demanded, stepping closer. Give me the fake evidence you planted, and I will fix this. I will tell the judge you were confused. I did not flinch. I picked up the remote control on the coffee table and pressed a single button. The large television screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the video of him standing in this very room years ago. Branding. The chaos is worth the credibility. Nolan froze. He watched his own face on the screen, listening to his own voice casually dismiss our children as marketing tools. The arrogance in the video was a stark contrast to the shivering, broken man standing before me. It was like a physical blow. He staggered back, hitting the edge of the sofa. That's out of context, he stammered, but the fight was draining out of him. It is the context, I said. And I have more. I have the audio from the party, the one where you call our children a litter. Nolan looked at me, and for the first time, he saw me. Not the tired nurse, not the hysterical ex-wife. He saw the wall he had run into. We can make a deal, he whispered, his hands shaking. Let's just delete it, please. For the kids. Here are the terms, I said, my voice hard as steel. You sign the new custody agreement giving me full decision-making power. You admit to your lawyer, on record, that you manipulated the previous proceedings so we can settle the fraud case internally, and you never, ever use a photograph of our children for your business again. You are blackmailing me, Nolan roared, stepping forward with a raised fist. Outside, the world exploded in red and blue light. A siren wailed, cutting through the storm. The front door opened. Miguel stepped in, followed closely by Sarah and two uniformed officers. Miguel looked at Nolan with a polite, cold smile. Good evening, Miguel said. We are just here to witness the conversation. Nolan looked at the police, then at the camera blinking on the bookshelf, then at me. Sarah stepped forward, her badge catching the light. Mr. Hayes, she said pleasantly, I strongly suggest you do not say another word without an attorney present. We have a lot of questions about your financial relationship with Councilman Hale. Nolan slumped. The rage evaporated, leaving only fear. He nodded, mute, and let the officers escort him out into the rain. Before he got into the squad car, he looked back at the house one last time. He looked at me standing in the doorway. There was no contempt in his eyes anymore, only the terrified realization that he had lost control of the story forever. 3 weeks later, the ink was dry on the new agreement. Nathan Hale was indicted on 12 counts of corruption. Judge Vance announced an early retirement due to health reasons. The system that had protected them was dismantled, brick, by the evidence found in a dead woman's attic. But the real victory was not in the courtroom. It was a warm Saturday in July. The sun was setting over Graybridge, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The smell of barbecue smoke filled the air. Miguel was manning the grill, arguing playfully with Tasha about the proper way to char a burger. Ruby was pushing the twins on the tire swing, her laugh loud and genuine. Jaden was teaching my oldest son how to fly a drone. I sat on the porch steps, watching them. The house behind me didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It didn't feel like a weapon. It just felt like a home. I thought of Eleanor. She had spent her final years gathering the truth so that one day I wouldn't have to be afraid. She had given me a shield when I thought I only had bare hands. I stood up and walked toward my chaotic, loud, beautiful family. I wasn't just Haley the survivor anymore. I was Haley the mother, the protector, the woman who walked into a haunted house and cleared out the ghosts. I smiled, stepping off the porch and onto the grass. If anyone asked, I would tell them this wasn't a story about destroying a man. It was a story about a woman who stopped apologizing for taking up space, and finally, found her own way home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to read your thoughts and connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear this journey.